On March 31st, 1889, Mother Frances Xavier Cabrini arrived in New York Harbor with 6 of her missionary sisters. One of her companions recalled that upon sighting the Statue of Liberty, Cabrini's face became radiant. The long voyage was over. The sisters were full of hope, anticipating the new beginnings awaiting them.
If the heart of Jesus gives me the means to build a ship on the sea, I will build the Christopher, the Christ-bearer, and sail all the oceans with either a small or a large community to bring the name of Jesus to all the people who as yet do not know him or have forgotten him.
Maria Francesca Cabrini was born on July 15, 1850, at Sant'Angelo Lodigiano, a small town on the plains of Lombardy, some 20 miles south of Milan. She was the 10th of 11 children. In the evenings, the family would gather around the hearth to read the stirring accounts of missionaries evangelizing in the Orient. It was at a tender age, then, that the seed of a missionary vocation was planted in Francesca's heart. Francesca Cabrini grew to maturity in tempestuous times. The revolutions which swept over Europe in mid-century aroused nationalist aspirations. In Italy, the flamboyant Garibaldi marched on Sicily and Naples. The Kingdom of Italy was proclaimed in 1861. The occupation of Rome in 1870 ended the temporal power of the Pope. The Risorgimento heightened patriotic emotions, reflected in a stunning revival in literature and the arts. At the same time, economic reforms led to material progress, and there were advances in education and transportation. Francesca, who yearned to consecrate herself to the Lord as a sister, had been rejected by at least 2 religious communities. At the House of Providence in Codogno, Francesca found a group of women struggling to form a new religious community, and she joined them. But there were problems of all kinds. So finally, in 1880, Bishop Gelmini disbanded the group, telling Francesca, "You have always wanted to be a missionary. Why not establish your own community?" Francesca seized the opportunity. She became the foundress of the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. The new community grew rapidly. New houses were opened in northern Italy in 1882, 84, 85, and 87. All the time, while Mother Cabrini encouraged the foundation of schools and orphanages, she held in her heart the desire to bring her new religious family to China. In 1887, Mother Cabrini met Bishop Scalabrini of Piacenza, who was to become the single most important individual to direct her steps towards a new mission which she had never considered, work among the immigrants from Italy to the Americas. Bishop Scalabrini saw in Mother Cabrini and her growing sisterhood the potential for a dynamic response to the immigrants' needs. Confiding his hopes to Pope Leo XIII, he was instrumental in the Holy Father's counsel to Mother Cabrini in 1889 that she must go not to the east, but to the west. The United States beckoned to newcomers as a land of opportunity. Many of the dispossessed masses of Europe sought refuge here. Italians alone accounted for approximately 4 million immigrants to the United States in the last decades of the 19th century and the first decades of the 20th century.
The arrival of the Italians in the United States was like a shocking experience for the receiving church. They were the first Latin group coming into an Anglo-Saxon culture, and they had a way of living their faith that was quite different, rooted in completely different traditions than the Northern Europeans, especially the Irish.
Well, when the Italians came, they were up against the original American nativists, but also many of their own co-religionists. Many of the Irish, fewer of the Germans, but many of the Irish especially had begun to make it. And the Irish very soon began to be prosperous. They made their way in through the police department, the fire department, civil service, and into politics. The Irish were very good at politics. But they really, then, they posed a barrier to the Italians.
When we moved on 64th Street, they were all Irish people. And we were the first Italian there. And the Irish didn't like the Italian. In fact, in any neighborhood. I remember a contractor, Orlando, he moved down there 59th and Master. Because he was Italian, everybody tried to get him out. But he says, I'm an American citizen, I'm going to stay here.
To get into church, there was 5 cents seat money you had to pay. The Italians simply said they didn't have 5 cents to drop in the collection basket. And also they found the Irish type of religion very cold. It wasn't the emotional religion that they had known at home. Now, that is precisely the situation into which Mother Cabrini brought her sisters.
Io voglio tutti vecio, io voglio tutti senso, stasera pillo piacio, non faccio da giatta.
The sisters soon felt the brunt of discrimination leveled against the Italians who were called guineas. Lacking much themselves, the sisters were happy to share the poverty of their immigrants.
The people were all Italians, all immigrants, who had very little education. And the men usually worked in the docks. They were longshoremen. And the women worked in the sweatshops, the factories, sewing on machines. And since the father and the mother both worked to keep some food on the table and clothes on their back, the children were left in the street. And Mother Cabrini went there and went around from house to house speaking to the parents, got their children in the school, organized sodalities in the parish, and it started growing that way.
Cabrini and her missionary sisters began begging for food and clothing to help the needy. They sought out the wealthy of New York for donations, but had to depend for their livelihood on the pennies, nickels, and dimes given by the poorest of the poor Italians. Ironically, it was to be the same all across America. A network of schools, hospitals, and orphanages would be built for the Italian immigrants from the pennies, nickels, and dimes which the Italian immigrants themselves were to contribute to the Missionary Sisters.
What a great time it was to be an American as the 20th century dawned. The robust Teddy Roosevelt entered the White House. George M. Cohan, draped in the American flag, pranced across the New York stage. At the market, eggs sold for 12 cents a dozen, and sirloin steak for 24 cents a pound. During that first exciting decade, telephones were entering our homes and our lives forever. The Wright brothers launched us onward and upward, and Henry Ford gave the common man access to the open road with his Model T. Henry James wrote, "The will to grow was everywhere, written large, and to grow no matter what."
New York City was Mother Cabrini's first destination, and she always returned to enlarge her missions, moving to Upper Manhattan and Dobbs Ferry. In New York, parish schools would be served and religious instruction given to children, youth, and adults. In Manhattan, Brooklyn, and upstate, where an orphanage would flourish in West Park on the banks of the Hudson River. Soon, health care would become a ministry for the immigrants, with the establishment of Columbus Hospital and Dispensary in Manhattan. Responding to the pleas of New Orleans' frightened Italians, following the lynchings in 1891 of 11 Italian immigrants, Mother Cabrini brought her sisters to this port city, where education and social service outreach programs were greatly needed. Orphanages were founded in New Orleans, Long Beach, Mississippi, Denver, Arlington, New Jersey, Los Angeles, Seattle, Golden, Colorado, and Philadelphia. Mining camps were visited in Pennsylvania and throughout the western United States. Nursing schools would soon flourish in New York and Chicago. An academy for well-off Italians would be set up in New York City. Industrial schools, which taught embroidery and other handwork, would take shape in parishes and orphanages.
cucina, posso accompagnare sti spaghetti, stasera mamma Rosa li cucina. Io voglio che ti vedo, io voglio che ti sento, stasera pillo piace, non faccio da...
Then we have also a copy of her naturalization papers, which states that she became a citizen of the United States in Seattle in 1909. And it gives her age and the color of her eyes and hair.
But when it came to a school, a boarding school, she wanted the best for the students. She wanted healthful environments. She'd say to the sisters, plant eucalyptus plants, they freshen the air. This extraordinary woman was by nature extremely timid and shy. And I think she also recognized that the natural timidity and the shyness had no place in a new world that was bustling with people aiming to get ahead. She wanted her sisters to get ahead, and she wanted the immigrants to get ahead too.
Mother Cabrini was a strong woman. She was, I think, a rather tiny woman physically. I knew a priest who knew her. He had been involved in some business negotiations with her. He actually spent most of his life down at Nativity Church on 2nd Avenue here in New York. And when I knew him, he was 89 years old, an old man. And he would tell us, we'd bait him. We used to go and see him. He was in a kind of a nursing home. We'd go and see him, and there were certain questions we knew we could ask and get a reaction. And one of them was, well, now, Father Walsh, what did you think of Mother Cabrini? And the standard response was, she was a fine businesswoman, but she was no saint. I think a lot of the priests were simply not used to a woman who would stand up to them. She wanted contracts fulfilled. I think that increasingly, as she traveled across the country, founding hospitals, opening houses of refuge, things like that, people found her a hard bargainer. But I think she also built up an enormous respect for herself. And they realized that she was indeed a great woman. Is there some chauvinism in here? I'm sure there was. It was around then, it's around now. But they weren't quite used to having this little, sister, not bow and scrape to them. I think that's largely what it was.
Mother Cabrini had been given only 2 years to live when she came to America in 1889. She would make 23 ocean crossings, despite her fear of water, to spread the works inspired by her missionary zeal. To Nicaragua, Panama, Argentina, Brazil, England, France, Spain, and Italy. Poor health would be endured, and arduous journeys would be undertaken by railroad and even muleback as she crisscrossed the Andes. While intending primarily to serve the Italian immigrants, Mother Cabrini was never narrowly nationalistic. All of her institutions were incorporated to receive those of every nationality. Missionary Sisters came from Italy, where the community was numerous. Italian Americans, Irish, Germans, Slavic, French, Spanish, and Latin American women joined Cabrini's Religious Institute. Returning to Chicago in the fall of 1917, the sisters saw a weaker Mother Cabrini. Since World War I was raging, she was worried about the children in Assumption School, which the sisters staffed in Chicago. Would they have any sweets for Christmas? The sisters went out and bought the candy and were told to fill them in. And one sister that I knew said she was very young at the time, and they were filling these little boxes of candy. And Mother Cabrini said, "Don't be stingy, fill it all the way up to the top. This may be all they get this Christmas." On the morning of December 22nd, Mother Cabrini felt a spell coming on. So she had dressed, gone to the door, unlatched it, and then fallen back in her rocking chair. But she had already gone home. And word spread throughout the world. And condolences began to come from people who had heard of her work, who've heard of this missionary whose heart had gone out to immigrants throughout the world. And immediately after World War II, in 1946, Mother Frances Xavier Cabrini was raised to the altars as the first American citizen to be canonized a saint.
We see the shrine as being a center of hospitality and of welcome for people really on a pilgrim journey to God. And for many of those people, Mother Cabrini is a way to do that. That's really no longer an Italian immigrant population. So now we feel like we're continuing to do her work in welcoming immigrants, whatever the newest immigrant group is.
I don't know that Cabrini ever envisioned what she left as a legacy. But I think her belief that God was with her and impelled by that spirit to be God present, to bring God's presence into the world and to the people that she met, that was primary. That was a real focus. And yes, she did it as a religious woman, and we do it as religious women. But I think her message is that any woman can do it. Nothing needs to hold us back. I think it's easy to get caught up in, well, I'm sick, so I don't, I can't, or I don't have the money, therefore I can't. I don't have the power, therefore I can't. I'm a woman, therefore I can't. But none of those things stopped Cabrini. And I think that's part of who we are today, is that none of those things needs to stop us. And so we continue to open new missions, to move into areas where we weren't 10 years ago. And not because we have a lot of money and therefore we can do it, but because the Lord is calling us into those areas, because the need is there.